Welcome to the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. Join us here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first. Herr Desrosiers started writing in 2017 and has not stopped. Her latest book is The Summer of Strawberry Rhubarb Pie, a collection of stories and poems from the heart. Okay, how many books is this now?
This is my fourth one, and I've got 3 more in the works.
Where did this come from? Have you always been a writer?
Well, no, you write the thing you have to do through school, and then all of a sudden at one point, your job takes you. And I basically did lots of technical writing. I mean, I was in health records management, so I was always writing policies and procedures and reports to federal and local governments about, hospitals and care and all of that. So then when I finally, actually it came about as one of my jobs, I was a risk manager, which means that when something goes wrong at a hospital, you're the one that has to take care of it and figure out, who's to blame.
Right.
I was at lunch with the attorney and then our insurer. And after we got through discussing the case, it was, well, what do you guys do when you're not doing this? And they said, well, the attorney was from Maine and the insurer liked to fish. So when I came back to my desk that day, I sat down at my typewriter, emphasis on typewriter.
What's that? For those who don't know what a could you explain what that might be, Jane?
A manual tool to put print on a piece of paper that required a lot of exertion.
Yes, you needed really strong fingers for that thing.
And so I wrote a story about a young boy who went fishing in Maine. And I found like a little picture and I drew the picture on the paper and it looked like a newsletter kind of thing. So around this little story, I created a newsletter. And for about 10 years, I wrote about this fictitious town in Maine with all of these great little characters, from the diner to the bakery to the editor of the newspaper. And, it was like a snapshot in time, like any newsletter is. Today's the day. This is what everybody did today. This is what the bowling team did. This is what they're doing there. And so I finally found somebody to listen to me after a lot of people said, gee, these are really funny. And so I found one woman who looked at them, and she's been my writing coach ever since. And she said, these are great. You knew all these people. She said, now just find one person to tell the story about the story. So you have to find that person. And she said, and that'll be $80. And I was like, oh, well. And so that's what happened. It went from one story, and then all of these people had, they've been waiting for me to start this. And so all of these thoughts and people and events and the whole entire story about going fishing, the hook, line, and sinker, came rolling right out on the paper. And so then the Summer of Strawberry Rhubarb Pie started out as a blog. It was spring, and I had been outside and I had picked some rhubarb. I'm very descriptive about how and texture and what I'm seeing and feeling. So that's what I started with the rhubarb leaves and then cutting it and all of that. And then then it evolved into a piece of fiction about the husband coming in saying, well, who died? And I'm explaining that, well, when I make a pie, it takes me time to think about the person. And when you sit down to have a piece of pie, that takes you time to think about the person as well, and maybe discuss it with someone who is there at the same thing. So that's how the story that's in 3 parts within the book evolved.
Does your character make pies when people die?
Yes. Yeah, that's the first part of the story, was being in a small local community and being a member of the church. And it was always her mother had done that. So she's talking to, that's how it starts out. There is an event, someone has passed, and then her daughters get into it, and it's like thinking about and passing on things. So I'm a lot about tradition and passing on the knowledge that you have. And which is life experiences, to the next generation, so that they can have some of that knowledge and store it away. Because as my daughter will say to me, she said, "How do you know so many random things?" And I said, "Well,"
Well,
we had to know a lot about a lot of things, things that, you had no, we had the 1953 Encyclopedia Britannica. There
right,
wasn't a Google button back then.
right. So this is 3 short stories, all revolving around the strawberry rhubarb pie.
And then interspersed within those 3 sections. So the story of Strawberry Rhubarb Pie is in 3 sections, but interspersed there are poems and then other short stories that are kind of reflections, like an Andy Rooney, if you remember back to 60 Minutes, where he would
Mm-hmm.
give his little experience of the day, or why do people do this? Why don't you people do that? And then, the poems are life experience, reflecting on moments. I mean, one is when I can remember my mother and my grandmother and I going to the beach, going to the ocean. And my mom was Polish, my grandmother's always Polish. And so sitting this sturdy little lady down in her chair, and then my mother doting over her while I'm out, and having each of us have an experience about being at the beach, but being away from the things. And, and I mean, it's just still so vivid, still so vivid for me. And then as you go from the second part to the third part, you have poems and stories that are reflecting more the seriousness or end of life. My mom passed from cancer. My sister had dementia. So I'm channeling those feelings into those passages and those stories.
Is this the format for all of your books?
No, not really, because a lot of people go, "Oh, this is probably the first life experience type thing that I have written." The majority of things that I've written, like the first 3 books, people that I was in the writing group with, got my main protagonist was, her mother passed away when she was born, and people kept saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry that your mother passed away." And I went, "No, no, no, no. This was all fiction. This is all of these things came out of my head, nothing out of my real life." I mean, I'm very much an observer of life. So if I see an interesting person, I store that away, and I use cragginess of their face, or what they had on, or how they walked. I use those as my characters, and I insert them into my stories. So yeah, and then the next 3 that I'm working on are much the same.
Tell me about this writing group. That sounds like it's been very helpful to you and encouraged you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a group within Connecticut. I belong to, it's CAPA, Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association, and I belong to the Southeastern chapter. And we meet on a monthly basis. So you have people that are just starting out, want to know something about it, people who have written, people who are publishers, people who are illustrators. And, we're an eclectic kind of group. I mean, some people have no experience at all, and they're just in awe of everything. And then a lot of us have published things, and in our own various ways. I mean, we have a few people that have done very well early on in their careers. I mean, I'm 72, so we have a lot of age and wisdom with us. And then you have some young folks coming in, and their experiences are more now not the traditional paper book, but more of like, what's going on with the media and social media, and how we can experience that. Because that's a lot of what happens is, you write a book, and you don't wait for somebody to come to your door, offer you a check, and then, here, we're going to put you on tour. I mean, those days are gone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now it's like you've got to get out there, and you've got to put yourself out in front of whoever and whenever and how many ever times you can stand it, to get people to listen to you, and to buy your book.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing to convince people when I'm talking to them, and I'll say, "What are you doing?" I ask every author, what are you
Yeah.
doing? What do you, well, the publisher is supposed to do, or they sent out, or they did. And no,
No,
what are
no.
you doing to get
Right.
behind your book where you live, where people
Right.
know who you are?
Sure.
Well, I really want to remain anonymous. Well, you're really
Yeah.
not going to sell a book that way.
No,
And
no.
so whenever I find an author like you, I like you to expand upon exactly what you're doing. I notice you have a website.
Yep. When I had finished the first book and I was like, okay, here we go. Now what the heck, and
Yeah.
I belonged to the Women's Writing Guild, and that was in New York City. And I went with all of these other people, with my little 2-minute speech in hand, ready to sit down in front of an agent and all that. And I did that. Very stressful. And everybody said, oh, we don't like this. If you put more sex in it, we'll buy it. And, why is it about fishing? And I'm going, no, it's metaphoric fishing. So it
Yeah.
was like, that didn't work. So finally, I just started sending things out and send, okay, you want a chapter, you want 50 pages, you want the whole manuscript, here you go, And finally, that's when Fulton picked me up, and it was like, okay, this is what's going to cost you. And as I had a couple of friends at that time. I hadn't joined the writers group yet, and they said, whatever it costs, don't you want to see it in print? Don't you want to hold it in your hands? You have worked so hard for this, so just jump and do it. And that was like the best advice, because again, everything's going to cost you, depending on whether you do it through whichever means. And you need a book that looks nice, that is saleable, that you can not just sell it online, but you want something that a bookstore or a gift shop or any place will take. I mean, and when you talk about getting yourself out there, it's like, people ask for donations for civic organizations. I'll put a basket together with all my books, a bottle of wine, some glasses, and say, have a wonderful time reading, and just hoping that people pass those books on, and I'll see people and I have no idea, and they go, no, I won your books in a raffle and they were just so good and I passed them on. And that's it. You build readership one book at a time, one person at a time.
Do you go out and do author signings?
I do. I put myself out as an author and a speaker, because organizations, lots of, women's groups, senior citizen groups are looking for people to come in and chit chat. And I think people like to hear about people's experiences, life experiences. And I've had quite the checkered career and jobs that I've done, and life has brought me in different ways. I've been married 3 times and had a myriad of cats and people and dogs. And so, there's lots of fun things to talk about.
Yeah. 3 times, huh, Jane? Wow.
Yeah, well, hey, you gotta
Whatever.
One of the ways I speak with people, I said, I'll come out with a piece of paper that's folded up like a roadmap, and I go, a lot of you here today knew exactly that you'd be here right now today. I said, but for me, and so then I hold up this piece of paper that's got all kinds of lines and arrows and everything. I said, not so much for me. There was no start at point A, and here I am today at point B. No.
Right.
I've had the whole alphabet 32 times, so.
Yep. I'm hearing a lot of book clubs. People saying, yeah, I have a local book club. So I talk about that probably every show. There is a book club in every town, whether it's through your church. It's hard to call up the local bookstore sometimes. It's hard to go to the Barnes and Noble sometimes, but you really got to think outside the box. Libraries.
Yeah, and bookstores they're starting to make a comeback, but where I am in southeastern, northeastern Connecticut, not so much. We have stores that sell our used bookstores. So I have to think of different places to do that with. But I do lots of arts and crafts festivals, lots of shows like that. Some of my best stuff is at wineries. I find that when people stroll around with a glass or two of wine, then I can have a conversation with them. Plus, you have to think of the cost of your book, and it's not like somebody comes over, you're at an arts and crafts show, and go, oh, I like that purple soap, I'm going to buy that purple soap, and that transaction's over in under 30 seconds. I have to have a conversation with somebody and get you to understand my book and have a little relationship with you.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that I can pick up from you. Oh, geez, I love your hat. I had one like that. And so then you start that conversation. One of the things I've thought about with my trilogy is that I want to rebrand the books, because when people walk by, it says Gone Fishing, the hook, the line, and the sinker. And people go, oh, they're about fishing. I'll have my husband come back. And I go, no, no, no. I'm like, oh,
It's a
God.
metaphor, yeah.
The metaphor, I mean, but there is fishing, but, and then the summer strawberry rhubarb pie, people go, oh, I love strawberry rhubarb pie. And that's why I included recipes in, in the back of that, because it's like, people like recipes. They go, oh, there's recipes. Yes, there are.
Do you tell people about, the leaves of rhubarbs, are poisonous, aren't they?
Right. Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They're very.
Gotta be careful. That's why when you said your husband walked in and said, who died? I thought, did they eat the leaf? You know? So, Jane, tell me, have you gotten traction? Like, do you feel like you've got a following at this point?
I have a following, albeit small, because again, it's like you build your readership one at a time. I know I have people that really wanted the folks in the Gone Fishing series, like, what are they doing now? What are they coming out? When's the next book? So I feel that I need to do a Christmas book, because that kind of ends off in a time when a Christmas book would work well. But I know when people see me at the local festivals, and some of them we have are pretty huge for one day things, and they come by and they go, oh, are you still working on that next one? Because at the end of each book, I always have the cover or the first chapter of the next book, so that people don't forget that there's something coming along.
Right. Right.
And as I always say, my biggest dream and hopes for my books and my characters would be to somehow get these to Hallmark, because they're just those kind of stories that, there's romance, there's a little mystery. I like to say that it's kind of like Nancy Drew met Murder, She Wrote in a Hallmark mystery, even though nobody died.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Jane, you're such an inspiration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was fun to talk with you too.
For those of you who believe this life is not your first life, check out our next book by Kevin Cunningham entitled Rapture of the Sleep. When did you start writing this?
Formally writing?
Yeah.
Quite honestly, January of last year. I had this story in my head. I've been writing it in my head for probably 30 years.
30 years, but were you a guy who kept a journal? Were you a guy who wrote creative stories in English class and your teachers loved you? No.
Well, to some degree, yeah. I mean, the teachers loved. I mean, what's not to love about me? But the teachers loved me. I don't know if I should admit this, but the English teachers loved me, and they based it on my creativity. I've never actually read a book from front to back, because my mind drifts off into the characters. So in school, I would read the first couple of chapters and visualize where the story would go. And that was my essays. And I got straight A's.
Okay, so you must have been doing something right.
I must have been. I have a creative mind, I believe.
Well, so Rapture of the Sleep, you started thinking about 30 years ago?
Approximately 30 years ago. The premise behind the story is something I've always felt strongly about, multiple consciousness, past lives type of thing, but in the form of a romance. So I've had that thought in my head, or the baseline in my head probably kicked in about 30 years ago. And then I did all the world building, as they call it, in my head over the course of 30 years. That's why when I say I started formally writing it last January, I just brain dumped what was in my head.
Was this a romance you had in your past life?
Well, actually, it could have been, right? That could have been the driving part of it. Again, I do believe in past lives, so it's very possible that my previous lives conjured themselves up in my imagination, not imagination, but my building of this story. That could have been, but I don't necessarily pinpoint. This is a fictional story. I pinpoint the framework of it, having experienced things in the past, but not necessarily this particular story.
So what happened to make you finally say, I got to do this now?
One, because I work in IT, and I had to do it now because I see the future state with artificial intelligence, and I wanted to have pride in the fact that I wrote this, and I fear, this is just me going off on a tangent, I fear AI is going to negatively impact the creativity of the arts and entertainment world. So I felt it was time to actually get off the pot and get this book out in my words, not AI's words.
I think that that concern is shared throughout the arts and entertainment world, which is now in the process of trying to make rules and regulations surrounding something we don't really understand yet.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I feel you. Yeah. So what's Rapture of the Sleep?
So the title itself is a play on words. So I'm a scuba diver as well, and there's a term in scuba diving called rapture of the deep. And so what that is when you're at a depth, and pressure of that depth affects your mind to see things that aren't really there. So Rapture of the Sleep is a play on words. So it's a story about a gentleman that's Killian Flaherty, happily married, family, and a loving wife, gets into a car accident, goes into a coma, aka the sleep part, Rapture of the Sleep. And while he's in a coma, he connects with the previous life. And the woman that was in his life and throughout multiple previous lives, he connects to that individual, reconnects to her while being in a coma. So he's perfectly happy where he is, but he has a sense of danger because he feels somebody is trying to eliminate his life. And ultimately what it is his wife in his future state, non-coma state, working with the doctors because he had been in a coma for so long. She has to get on with her life. So she's working with the doctors and lawyers to pull him off life support, which would ultimately kill him in his coma state and his life. So he has to make the choice between staying in his coma state with his previous love throughout lives or return to his current life.
So if they disconnect Killian from life support, is he then free?
Yes, his consciousness would have to find her again, though. That's kind of the premise, is that he finally reconnected, had the ability to reconnect. And so if he gets pulled off life support in I don't want to call it his real life because all lives are real, he would have to go through that journey and self-discovery again and find her. And the underlying premise of the book is that we all have that ability to connect to our past lives as children when we first come out. But the real world, or the world that we're currently in, overlaps it, and it forces our brains to hide those memories and only focus on the current. So he found his Lindsay in his coma, and he feared that he would not be able to re-find her again or quite so easily. So he's perfectly happy in the coma, but he recognizes that he has to go back to his life with his Jennifer wife.
Is Jennifer discussing getting him off life support out of concern that the husband that she loved would spend the rest of his life in a coma, and that was the most humane thing to do?
Yeah, she's kind of the heroine in the story because she has to get on with her life, right? As well, it's I believe it's an 8-month period of time, which isn't that long, but still, it's draining on her emotionally and her family, and she has to make that hard decision as to, he's not showing any signs of coming out of this, so I have to move on with my life and my family's life. So let's, call it the end of the chapter.
Yeah. And just getting back to what you were saying about past lives, I think the reason that we bury it is because culturally, if you start talking about your past lives with someone, oh my God,
you're crazy.
You're out of your
batshit. Yes. And I do kind of touch on that in the book, because one of the parts of the book is that when he comes out of a coma, he ultimately finds a way to reconnect back to his Lindsay through his dream state. And he's able to go to that realm and communicate with others that are more knowledgeable of the correlation between your current life and your multiple past lives. So he hosts a party with his family, Jennifer, on the Today World. And he has that same concern that people are going to think he's badass crazy when he's talking about how he can transcend between his multiple lives. So culturally, yes, we are forced to close it off.
Now, when you talk about this book to your friends or do book signings, what kind of reception are you getting?
I'm actually getting a lot of positive reception with people that say I experienced that, or I believe in that, and I want to talk to you because this is a weird sidetrack, but I'm the angel of death for my family, meaning that I'm the person that is for my mother, my father, my sister. I've made the decision for the family as to when it was time. So I've seen their eyes on their last breath, and it's a peaceful last breath. And the more people I talk to about my story, the more I recognize that more people need to be at ease knowing that when we expire, it's the I call it a car, right? Our bodies is the car that our consciousness travels around in. Doesn't mean the engine dies. It just means the tires and wheels no longer work and we go on to somebody else or something else. So when I talk to people, it puts them at peace. It actually helps them with their fear or their concern over thinking when you die, you die. No, you don't die. You're reborn.
Well, on that note, do you also believe that people from your past who have passed on communicate with you?
Yes.
I do too. And I'll say to my husband, your brother came to me and he really wants you to do this for him. I'm telling you. And my husband's like, of course he came to you, Alice. They always come to you. I'm like, well,
they come with who welcomes them.
Yeah. If you're open to it, they will come to you. But the question always is, how do we know the difference between what's really happening and how much is a figment of our imagination and the work of our very complicated brains?
Yes. And it's very difficult to answer that question because I would argue nothing is a figment of our imagination. It's a projection of our consciousness that has either seen it or had the ability to communicate with in the different realms, if you want to call it that. I also think that their multiple personality disorder, I don't consider that a disorder. And society has labeled most of the individuals that experience that state as medically disabled, when I would argue that maybe they are the ones that can touch and reconnect with all of their past lives at different stages, right? So
yes, that's one way to look at it. Going to keep writing?
I am going to keep writing. It's not in the same genre. I have I call it Distractions. My next book is, again, similar to this book I'm formulating in my head, but the next book is Distractions, where I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am very aware of the fact that society will distract us to look to the right when something more important is happening to the left that we really should have paid attention to.
I think a lot of people are going to agree with you on that too.
Yes, yes, indeed. So,
you have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you.
From X-ray tech to published author, Sheila D. Zemp loves reading romance novels, so she wrote one. It's entitled He Came Back to Me. Now, Sheila, did you always like to write, keep a journal as a kid, stuff like that?
I did nothing. It was really weird. I was like, I did nothing. I'm like I did well in school and I made good grades, top of my class type kind of thing, but that's been forever ago. And when I got ready to retire, I started reading. For a couple of years, I read a lot of novels, and I just decided that I wanted my brain to continue to work. So I started writing, but I didn't know that I was going to publish it. I just thought it was one of those things. I was going to make up this story and see what happens, see if I could write a book, and I'll be darned if I didn't get it done.
Was there any kind of inspiration that came out of nowhere?
I just created the characters, and once I started writing, I knew I wanted to incorporate, places that I'd been and where I'd worked. And so I think that I always wanted to do this, and I just never thought about, I didn't have time. It was life. Life passed, you enjoy life and you go through and you do what you need to do. And then, take care of your home and your husband and your children and then your grandchildren. And so now it's like everybody's getting old enough to take care of themselves. And so I thought, well, I'll just sit down and do what I want to do. And that's what I did.
What'd you come up with? He came back to me.
Yes. It's a love story. It's a romance. That's because that's what I usually read. And I wanted it to be a little bit romance, a little bit action packed, something mysterious, to get to the point of being a page turner, something that I would want to read. Sarah Beth is the main character, and then Hunter is the old boyfriend. When I first started it, she was in Stillwater graduating, and I wanted to incorporate some of the different places in Stillwater that, I had been, as far as restaurants and stuff like that. And I wanted somebody to be able to, if they graduated at Stillwater, I thought that would be kind of cool because they'd been in that same situation.
Right.
And I had gone to school at OSU. And so I incorporated that, and she met her brother's friend in high school. And so they didn't really ever connect completely except for one kiss. And, both of them, I think, had remembered that kiss because it was real powerful. And he didn't want to get involved with her because of his relationship with her brother. So after high school, after college, she'd gone to college for like 6 years. And so she was a freshman. So it'd been several years since she'd been with him or had that first kiss. They reconnected at graduation, and he came to her graduation party. And, the sparks were high. Her feelings were strong. Their chemistry was ridiculous. And so he decided to go down. She wanted to be more in the warmer situation because she was originally from Wyoming. So she wanted to settle somewhere south. And so had an interview with a government company. She's a scientist, and she was going to work in the field of agriculture because that's what her dad did. And so she went down to Fort Worth, and he lives about a couple of hours from Fort Worth. And so he called her and asked her if she needed him to help her because, big brother type kind of thing. She thought, that'd be good. That's all this is. And then whenever they got together, of course, their chemistry was overwhelming, and they ended up, he had finally told her what was going on in his marriage. He was having trouble. And so he didn't really want to get her involved, but she got involved. And so the wife was addicted to prescription medications, and then she ended up going to drug dealers, to get more of a high. And so he wanted to find out how she was getting them and who she was getting them from. So Sarah Beth and her best friend, which is her roommate, Jennifer, they went down to help him finding out who the actual drug dealer was. Anyway, he found Lisa, the wife, at a drug house, basically. The police were there, and they ended up confiscating all of the drugs and the money that was in this house. And so then the drug dealer wants it back, and he comes into the picture later, and he wants to get his money. And so he's taken Sarah and her friends hostage until Hunter can get him the money.
So her first true love ends up in a situation where he can save her life or not.
Yes.
Woo!
He saves her in that instance, and then they go on a trip and there's a lot of sex in the book because their chemistry is wonderful.
And that's something well, right? We write what we know, right? Am I right, Sheila? We write what we know.
Yes. Then they end up in Aruba, and then they come back, and then they go home because he wants to ask her dad if he can marry her. And that starts my next book.
How many books do you foresee with these characters?
3. That's all I'm going to do with them. I've got the second book. It's pretty well done. It's in editing now. So,
Sheila, it sounds like you're really enjoying this.
I am. It's been a great experience doing it out of my house, and of course my husband's retired now too. And he is, in and out, which is kind of, I need a place just by myself.
Yes. Don't we all? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Are you talking about it?
Yes, I am.
Tell me what you're doing.
I've got 2 more book signings, local areas. I've got 2 more book signings that are scheduled. I have Voyage. I don't know if you know them or not, but they're like a company that can help people get started with their scripts to make it into a movie.
Oh, okay.
Or a series. So I'm at the beginnings of that.
So you're going to end up turning this into some kind of a screenplay or something for television, maybe?
Yes.
That's great. That's very exciting. You say you've got 2 book signings coming up. That means you've already had a couple of book signings?
Yes.
How did you get them? How did you set them up?
Well, I had I have friends in town, that wanted to do the first one, which is my local one. And then there's a couple of smaller bookstores that are, mom and pop type stores. And I went to them and asked them about it. And of course they were very eager to do it. And they didn't want, they were good to local artists in Oklahoma. And my book is displayed in Oklahoma City at the mall and an art gallery.
That's great, Sheila. I wish all of our authors had that experience, because not all of them, have the drive or the confidence to go out and promote their book like that. And not all local bookstores are as kind to first-time authors. So it's good to know that they're out there. What would be your advice to first-time authors?
Don't ever give up. Fight as hard as you can to get it out there. If you want it to be out there, you have to be your own cheerleader. That's definitely, you have to be your own cheerleader, because the companies that publish your book, they're going to set you up. They're going to do whatever they want, whatever you pay them to do. And after that, then they're done. You have to be the one that pushes it.
Yep. Well, listen, I am so glad you were able to talk to me today.
Glad to be able to do it. I want to get my book out there because I think it's a good story. I think I have a good storyline, and the characters are incredibly nice, wonderful, erotic, nothing too off the wall like 50 Shades, but something in that line. So,
well, I can tell you from looking at the cover of the book, your leading man is quite the hunk, I have to say. Sheila, thank you so much. Listen, you have a great day.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Our next book, entitled Gabriel in the Jungle, was inspired by author Brandi Young's son. So how did that come about?
With this book, it was just one of those kind of off the whim things. It started just based on a small book that my son, he was 6 at the time, he wrote. And it just inspired me to kind of make his story a bigger story. And so that was just my initial writing attempt. I was preparing for a meeting and he wanted to talk, and I just didn't have the time right then. And so I just stapled some papers together, put a clip art picture on the front, and I asked him to write me a story about going to the jungle. And he got really excited about it. He wrote down what he thought he would see. And I just wanted to do something to inspire him to just chase his dreams and not, walk in fear. So that's why I started writing the story. But then it just sat, after I finished writing it, I just kind of got distracted or other things came up. So it just sat for a few years before I was able to do anything more with it.
So tell me the story.
Well, the son is based on my son. I mean, the story is based on my son, Gabriel. So it just starts out with him waking up where he's just in the jungle and he meets a tiger. And of course, he's terrified, but the tiger begins to talk to him and says, "Hey, let me take you through the jungle." And so he decides hey, let's go for it. He hops on the tiger's back and they just walk through the jungle and they meet some interesting, exciting creatures.
But they meet some terrifying animals along the way, right?
Yeah, they meet a snake and an anaconda, and it grabs his leg, and of course he's terrified, and the tiger does defend him and scares the anaconda away. The very end, he hears the tiger calling his name, but he never gave the tiger his name. And so he realizes at the end it was all a dream.
When your son handed you this story at the age of 6, you must have been very impressed.
Oh, well, I think that was just kind of why I wanted to just push it a little bit more. It was just, I wanted to keep his creative juices going. I didn't have that type of inspiration when I was younger, so I wanted to ensure that he just continues to think outside of the box.
Did he continue? Does he continue to write?
He does things here and there. He did write. He wanted to do it again, so he wrote a book about I think it was about space. And then over the last couple of years, he's been playing around with different comic books and comic book characters. I'm really trying to encourage his drawing ability. He has the ability to draw, but he doesn't really do too much with it. But yeah, he still has that creative thing that he does. So that's really, really exciting.
How old is he?
He's 12 now.
When you finished this book, what was his reaction?
He was just excited. He was like, "Oh, we're going to put it on Amazon and we're going to be millionaires."
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. His lips to God's ears.
Right, exactly.
Did you keep writing after this?
I did, and I do have a follow-up. So I want it to be an actual series of, Gabriel just doing different adventures. And so I do have the next book written and illustrated. It's Gabriel's Under the Sea. And so he meets a family of swordfish. He's on a trip with his dad, and he meets a family of swordfish, a mother, dad, and a baby swordfish. And again, they go into an interesting journey in the ocean. So I do have that one done, and I'm working on the next one as well in the series.
Are there messages attached to these stories?
I don't have a clear message as to anything in particular, but I would hope the message is just to have fun. Just don't be afraid to experience something outside of what's normal, what's natural for you. Don't limit yourself to just the typical. So it's just fun. It's just meant to be fun.
Yeah. Are you able to get the books to other children?
Not just yet. That is on my agenda for this year. I like to meet with my local library branch and set up a reading with them. And then my son's school as well, his elementary school, I'd like to be able to schedule some time to sit down, or actually have my son and one of his friends sit with the elementary kids and read the book to them. I think that would be a really good opportunity for, my son to get engaged and, really showcase the book and talk about, his part in writing it as well.
Yeah, how he inspired his mom to write a book.
Exactly. Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
And I love the idea of older kids reading to younger kids. I love that idea.
Yeah, I think it's exciting, to be able, because he goes to a school that's K through 12, so there is a lot of involvement with the older kids helping out. When the teacher has to step out, some of the older kids will come in and kind of work and assist with the younger kids. So I think it's really critical. The younger kids see the older kids, they admire them, and so just to have that interaction, I think it's great.
Good job, Brandi. Good for you.
Thank you.
We're so busy. It's really interesting. You've got a big job that, something inside of you said, wait, I have to encourage him. He wants to talk to me. He wants to share this story with me. So you illustrate how parents and children inspire each other.
Yeah, I think
if you let them.
I think so. It was one of those things where he really wanted to talk, and I didn't have the opportunity right then. But once I finished my meeting, he came down and I made him present the story and read it out loud to me. And he was really, really excited about it. So, it generated additional conversation. So yeah, I think it was just a really good experience on both sides.
Great. Brandi, thanks so much.
Thank you, Alice. I appreciate it.
Branded Kindling is the name of our next book. It's a sci-fi adventure from Luke Wahlberg. And nobody ever makes comments about your name, right?
No, never. I've been making a joke with, like the people that I've, given the free copies to and been talking to about it for the longest. I was like, my goal is to be the third most famous Wahlberg.
Not a bad goal. Not a bad goal.
If I get there, I'll be fine.
Listen, what do you do for a living?
I am a supervisor for a freight company.
And when do you have time to write?
Honestly, when I started writing, it was back when I was in college and in high school, just to keep my brain busy. It was something that an English teacher had got me into, just writing to get my mind out of things and express creativity. But then I dropped it. I got permanently injured back when I was 20 years old.
What happened?
it was a job that I was on. I injured my back. I still work with it now, but I was paralyzed for 6 months. But that was 15 years ago, which is one reason why I want to get away from working in an industry where I'm on my feet all day. And like the entirety of what I've written, like I've written 5 books in this series. When I got back into writing a few years ago, I just started doing it on break. I downloaded a Word app on my phone, and I just started going back through and, keeping myself busy. Like I had that story in the back of my head, kept writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. And then before I realized it, I had written a good 300,000 words, and I hadn't even scratched the surface on the story that I'd initially wrote, which I had lost on an old computer. But over the last 5 years or so, I got back into it again, completely redid how I had the story laid out, and I started breaking it down to where it was in manageable chunks. Because like the whole series, like as of the end of the 5th book, I'm over 1 million words. So
That's a lot.
It's pretty long. By the time it's all done with the 7 books that I have planned in the series, it'll be longer than the Harry Potter series in word count, which is a little ambitious for somebody's first foray into writing. But I've started with Fulton to, get a feel for how the whole system works, and I want to, move on to, get a, proper foot in the door as far as, pushing this idea out there. I just did it as a side thing. I'm a big gamer, so when I was at home, I pretty much just laid there, unable to do much else, gaming and writing on my laptop.
I talk to so many gamers who end up writing sci-fi.
Yeah,
I guess it's just part of, where your brain goes.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of because, when you get immersed into like a fantasy world, you want to make those stories how you think they should be written, and you get these ideas in your head like, well, I could have written that better, or I could have said, well, if they would have done this better. But that's been a big influence for 30 plus years. It's it's in my blood at this point.
Yeah.
But so the story, the Branded series, well, the first book revolves around a guy named Nate. He's one of 2 main protagonists. The second one's introduced in the second book. He has an innate connection to one of these higher beings that's on this planet. This takes place about 3,000 years in the future after humanity has left Earth. We found another planet where there's also intelligent species, but it's also a very bizarre place. Half the planet is a desolate wasteland that nobody bothers to touch. And there's also 16 tangible godlike beings that control how the planet works. Like they're in control of the individual elements and countering each other to make sure that nothing goes out of whack. Those higher beings also bestow their powers and their blessings onto their subjects by making them go through trials and showing that they have the mental and physical capacity to serve them. Okay. So Nate, when he was a child, comes into contact with one of these higher beings. He had no recollection of it, and just one day something happens right towards the beginning of the book that kind of zones him in and out of being in control of his connection, where he is taken over by this higher being and pretty much coerced to save an entire city on a whim. He doesn't even realize he's doing it. And when he comes to, after defeating this giant monster that was attacking the city, he's then like this. I don't want to say it's spoiler territory, but he's surrounded by the rulers and all of the generals of the military of that city. Going, who are you again? Well, I'm a mechanic. Excuse me. That they all look at each other, going, well, now what do we do? So it follows him from there, where he accepts a role in the military. He's trained further. That power awakens again, and they realize what's going on with him. And they have him go through special training with another character who has essentially the living human avatar of the god of these gods. So they bring him in, and they train him. And the story progresses from there, go from him being, a simple young adult to having the world dumped on his head, but him not knowing how to tell anybody else no. And it devolves into finding where his connection is with these higher beings and where the antagonist is. Because the antagonist isn't really introduced until maybe 2 chapters from the end.
Okay.
Like, the climax reveals the antagonist, which is kind of a strange way to do it, but I think it's about as good as it could be given how I wanted the story to progress. So the cliffhanger is the introduction of the antagonist. So the main event of the climax, which is, say, like the back third of the book leads into the climax. It's pretty much divided into 3 arcs. You have the awakening arc, the training arc, and then the final arc, which is, they know the antagonist's name only. They don't know who he is. They know what he's done to a degree, but everything starts to fall together as to all these different events being connected. Like, why certain people are acting this way? Why are we having issues with the animals that are around in the countryside? Like, one of the main things that's been driving the whole investigation that they've been doing during the story has been a spike in aggressive animal attacks.
Okay.
So they've been following certain political figures that have been acting strangely, and it all comes to a head when they find out this person's name, and everything starts to click together.
Okay.
And it's like, okay, why is all this happening? And they come to this name, and not even the gods know who he is.
Great.
But it sounds familiar. But that's revealed relatively early on in the second book.
All right.
But the story from there I don't want to make myself sound suspenseful because I am terrible at writing suspense.
Okay.
But the way that I wrote everything going past the first book makes pretty much everything seem completely pointless by the time the third book hits.
All right. Now, let me ask you this. How are you generating interest in this series?
Well, I've been talking to pretty much everybody that I run into, where I have more than a few sentences with them. If I can carry on more than a couple sentences in them, I can work in that I'm an author of some sort. I've learned, oddly enough, in the last year and a half since I got on with this contract, that a lot of truck drivers are big readers. Had no idea before.
Yeah.
But a lot of the guys that I work with have taken an interest. And I know a couple of them have actually bought copies, and a couple of them have reserved them, but they've taken other bids, so I haven't seen them.
Huh.
And one of my first copies, oddly enough, went to my ex-wife, who is a big reader. And another one went to a bartender friend of mine that I've known for almost a decade. I haven't given anybody the second copy. I'm actually, before you called me, I was literally sitting at my computer, have a playlist of music going while I have my second draft, like my second book on one side of my screen and a rewrite section on another one, so I can make sure everything is like, just making sure like there's continuity and fixing a couple things that I didn't really like.
Right.
Because it's been a couple years since I wrote that one, and there's a couple things that have changed significantly.
Right. All right. So, you're writing and rewriting, but that's what writing is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just constantly going back. I don't think you're ever satisfied. I've never written anything that I could rewrite it 16 times. And then when I see it in print or I see it, the final draft, there's still something I could have changed. But
oh yeah, when page design came through, I remember looking at it and going back through and rereading it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I felt bad. I was like, this is the 5th time I've asked them to do this, but I need to change this. I didn't spot on the first time. Like,
are they good about that?
Oh yeah, they were excellent about taking care of things. Like, they're the ones that are doing the outreach program instead of like these interviews and doing the websites and doing the editing and page design and cover design. I'm pleased with it. It's all about, make sure that this was the product that I wanted rather than, like if I would have done the new author type thing that they have on Amazon,
Yeah.
where you can just flat publish things.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen some horrifying literature that comes through that thing.
Right.
Just like amateur authors that don't realize that, yes, you do need an editor. I thought I was fine. I have not seen that much red pen on a piece of paper since I was in like third grade. Like I thought I was good at this. I aced English. I had an A in AP English in high school. Yeah, I forgot how commas work.
No, that's why you have an editor. Because, you're also, you're going through your process. You have a flow of consciousness. You're getting the words down on the paper. That's what editors are all about, right? And they send it back to you. Doesn't mean you're bad at what you do. It just, the best authors in the world have editors. But anyway, it sounds like a very interesting series, Luke, and I wish you a lot of luck.
All right. Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of the ReaderHouse Author Roundtable, where authors from all walks of life come together to discuss the trials, tribulations, and triumphs of publishing their books. I'm Alice Stockton Rossini. We hope to see you back here every Saturday night at 8 o'clock, or listen to our podcast anytime on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and PodServe, just to name a few. The Author Roundtable is sponsored by ReaderHouse Online Bookstore, where independent new authors come first.